I was a teenager. I don't remember what summer it was, no, but I remember I was standing in front of my one-room cabin in West Yellowstone, talking to my father about something, and his pickup truck drove up. Two guys got out of the truck. One was Al Jones, and he was older. I think he must have been, maybe he was 19 years old. And he had a guy with him by the name of Don Peterson. I didn't know either one of those guys, but they walked over and shook my hand, shook my father's hand, and said, "Forrest, I hear you're looking for a job." And I said, "Well, what do you have in mind?" He said, "We're going to go up in the mountains and cut a bunch of lodgepole pines. I have a contract with a guy building cabins, and he wants me to get a bunch of lodgepole pines for him." He said, "Are you looking for a job?" And I said, "Well," my father said, "How long are you going to be up there?" And Al Jones says, "Oh, maybe 6 weeks, probably not longer than 6 weeks." And I said, "Sure, I'll go." My father said, "Okay," and that was pretty much all there was to that. I'm sure he paid me, but I don't remember what it was. Couldn't have been very much. The next morning, real early at first light, we got in the pickup truck and we headed out. And I didn't really know what to expect. I told him I didn't have any logging shoes. You know, there's such a thing as a logging boot, and I didn't have any. You know, I can't go out in the mountains in my tennis shoes, and so. But Don Peterson had an old pair that he had worn out, and he gave those to me, and he said, "Try these on." Well, they were too big for me, but I put 2 pair of socks on, heavy wool socks on, and they fit pretty good. And so I said, "Okay, I'll go." So here we are now. We're heading out on State Road 20 out west of West Yellowstone. Just before you get to Targhee Pass, there's a little gravel road that turns right. It takes you to Denny Creek. And so we're driving down. I didn't know where we were going, but I didn't much care anyway. And we came to a little dirt road to the left, and there's grass growing all over. Nobody had been on that road. We saw a couple of truck tires in the last month, just before you get, I think, to Rumball Creek. But anyway, we drove up that road about 2 miles. Very difficult road to navigate with a car. And Al had purchased from the Forest Service a bunch of trees, lodgepole pines. And he was told where he could cut those pines, so that's where we're going to go and camp. And lodgepole pine, you know, if it's 10 inches in diameter at the base, you go up 50 feet and it's still 10 inches. Those things don't taper much, and that's what Al wanted, because they were going to be used for building log cabins. And we didn't have a tent or anything, but I had a bedroll that I'd had for some time. I made it out of a bunch of quilts that I got someplace, and it was a pretty good bedroll, but it wasn't waterproof. And so I did have a tarpaulin. I took and that's about all we had. We had a few groceries that are going to last us a couple of days, but we set up camp there, and I built a kind of a lean-to looking thing out of pines. They would retard water for about 10 seconds, and then it starts. But they'd keep the hail off of me, and we set up a camp there with almost nothing. There was a little stream of water there, about 15 feet over there, and it was maybe 4 feet wide and a foot deep, fast-running water, and we're always talking about what we're going to do, what are we going to eat, but these guys had a .22 rifle, they had a shotgun, and I took my fly rod out there. So we had fish. We'd catch fish in Hebgen Lake, and we'd bring them up there and put them in that little stream of water, and they couldn't get out, so every time we wanted something to eat, well, we'd take a fish out and we'd clean the fish and then wrap it in mud maybe an inch thick all the way around the fish. And then we'd put it in the coals in the fire and put coals on top of it, and 30, 45 minutes later, you take that thing out, it's hot, and it breaks open real easy, and now you're looking at a beautiful pink pink flesh of a brown trout or rainbow trout, and the skin comes off with the mud. I mean, it's beautiful. I mean, I learned a lot with those guys. But we had squirrels, and we had grouse out of season, and we had all the chipmunks we wanted, but there's not much food in those little chipmunks. I think the name of that chipmunk is the least chipmunk. I guess there's a reason for that name, but anyway, we ate pretty good, if you can call that some kind of luxury. Though it was fun being out there, and I found an old coffee pot. I know it had to hold more than a gallon of coffee, and it'd been laying there, I don't know how long, I want to say 100 years, but it'd been there a long time. The problem was that somebody shot a bullet hole, 38 caliber bullet hole, right about this far from the bottom of that coffee pot, and I guess that's why they left it there. But anyway, I found that thing, and when you get up at first light, I'm a night person. I hate to get up early, particularly if my bedroll is wet and I'm cold. But we didn't have any coffee, and we didn't have any hot chocolate or anything like that. So we decided that we would make coffee out of boiling pine needles. And I had done this before with Donnie Joe, on my trip. We were looking for Lewis and Clark, but I found I carved a pine limb, off of a pine tree, and stuck it through that hole and across the pot and out the other side, and it fit pretty good. It dripped a little bit, but it would keep the water from pouring out of that coffee pot, and we'd fill that thing about 2/3 full of water and put pine needles and pine cones in it, and we experimented around. There are a lot of wildflowers up there. We'd throw dandelions in there or daisies or different things, and none of that helped. But when you boil pine needles for a while, the oil floats to the surface. I want to call it kerosene. That probably is real close. It sure smelled like kerosene. But then we had, when we got ready to drink some of that terrible stuff, we'd take a stick and brush all of the oil off the top of that. And you take a drink of that stuff, let me tell you, it'd clean out your sinuses. But it was astringent, and it'd wake you up. We did that enough times that I remember pretty vividly what that stuff smelled like and tastes like. But we lived pretty good, and we didn't have a chainsaw, but we had axes, and I could cut it, take all the limbs off of it with an axe, peel all the bark off of it, and I could do 1.5 or 2 of those things in an 8-hour day. Your hands are covered with that pine sap, and there's no way to get that stuff off. So in the evenings we'd go down to Hebgen Lake, about 200 or 300 feet down there, and fish, and we'd wash our hands in sand. And it was like we're sandpaper in our hands what we were doing, but we could get enough of that stuff off at least to be comfortable. And every time we'd get 1 or 2 logs ready to go down, Al had this big old draft horse, beautiful big old house draft horse. His name was Billy Joe, and he'd hook Billy Joe up to a log, and we'd snake that thing down to Hebgen Lake and put it right there on the sandy shore, and we'd chain those things together and pull them tight with a come along on the front and on the back both. And then we'd get in that little boat of his, a rowboat with a motor on the back, and try to pull those things 2 miles across Hebgen Lake against the wind. I think he had a 10-horse motor, and we weren't going a mile a week, but particularly when the wind was blowing, I mean, that boat just wouldn't even move sometimes, because we were driving not only a heavy load, but they were a sail, they were trying to go against. But we did that. We had to pull them across the lake because we couldn't get a truck in where we were camped to load them on a truck. And he had a big truck. It didn't have it had a motor on it, but the motor was open air motor, and I'm sure it had 100,000 miles on it. but we hauled those things across the lake, and we had a heck of a time. I don't remember how we got them on that truck because we didn't have any kind of a crane or anything, but we did that, and we took them into town, and we dumped them, and we got fresh supplies, and we went back out again. My parents didn't seem to care. I mean, they were tickled to death. Anything that I wanted to do, as long as I had a job, it was okay with them. And I think we made 2 or 3 trips. We must have hauled in about 50, 60, 70 big lodgepole pines. One of the great experiences of my life was that 6 weeks or 2 months I spent out with Al Jones and Don Peterson. Good times, and I loved that country. Wildflowers every place, fast-running water, Hebgen Lake full of trout, and we're looking at deer and elk and black bear. We never did see a grizzly. They were in there, but they never did bother us. But grouse, and gee, a wonderful experience. And the downside was the afternoon thunderstorms appear in about 20 minutes, and we'd see them coming, and we'd try to hunker down, get in our bedroll and put the tarp on top of it, but you can never protect yourself from those Montana thunderstorms, and that water is cold, and when your bedroll gets wet, there's no way to dry it before it's time to get in at night. But fortunately, we'd build a big fire at night, and I'd get up and put another 4 or 5 logs on that fire. We kept that thing going all night, and you smell like smoke, but we could go down to Hebgen Lake and jump in that thing and take a bath, and great memories. And I loved that. I lived doing that. It was hard work.